Reviews are every day. Hey RV family, keep it tight. My name is Jay Morris, the Review Guy, and I'm back again to bring you another video. And in this one, I'm going to be covering the new Knocked Loose album entitled A Different Shade of Blue. So this is the second studio-length album released on Pure Noise Records by the Kentucky hardcore punk band Knocked Loose, formed in 2013. I use the terminology of hardcore punk fairly loosely, considering the fact that they do fit more squarely into the heavy hardcore scene or even the metalcore scene, with how breakdown-esque they are and how heavy they are and mosh-friendly they are. They're closer to kind of the beat-down type hardcore punk. I was planning on checking this record out when it came out, and the fact that it got some considerable hype and acclaim when it got released, it made me want to check it out even more. This album is 12 tracks and 38 minutes, and I'm feeling a lot of the same way I did of their debut release, which is not a bad thing. This record succeeds on a cohesive listen, but somewhat flounders a little bit when it comes to straight up diversity. But what it somewhat lacks in diversity and memorability, it makes up for in its heaviness, in its cohesive songwriting, its flavorful instrumentation, and its blistering production. Not to mention Bryan Garris's just completely expressive, vibrant screams on this record that are very hardcore punk-esque, with some metalcore thrown in there, as well as his deepened growls. His growls have such a hardcore punk rage and aggression to them, even though metalcore is supposed to be half hardcore punk. As I'm listening through this record, I'm hearing quite a few different influences. I'm not sure if a lot of them were intentionally put in place, but I feel like to give you a little bit of context of what you're going to get going into the record, I will say a lot of the way these riffs function so chaotically and so frantically, it does remind me somewhat of the 2000s mathcore scene, and some of the ways Bryan's vocals just reach up with such sorrow and complete and utter anguish and hopelessness reminds me somewhat of the 2000s screamo scene. Most of these tracks follow a pretty strict formula by Knocked Loose standards. Very heavy, a breakdown comes in, sometimes you'll get multiple breakdowns, very expressive confessional type songwriting, very powerful at times, very charged with emotion. Much like a lot of contemporary metalcore and hardcore punk bands, I feel like the drums are what really lead these compositions. They are very punchy, very well mixed on this record, and with those frazzled out guitars, I will say the bass is also very gnarly on this record, very just grimy a lot of times when it comes through, very prominent. I will commend that. One of the other things I'm digging about this record is how the breakdowns function. On the surface, when you're listening to it, it does sound like some classic metalcore-esque breakdowns. Nothing really new there, but in the way that they're delivered, they don't let it get boring, they don't let it fizzle out in any way, where they just give some pre-line and then they just go straight into the breakdown, and it's super chuggy, down-tuned, and it just lasts for a little bit. They sometimes will put vocals alongside the breakdowns, they'll sometimes put some different interesting progressions within the breakdowns to break up the monotony, and I appreciate that because as someone that does listen to a lot of metalcore, hardcore punk, and a lot of other genres that do incorporate breakdowns, a lot of times they just seem like they're there for breakdown's sake. And even though there are some tracks on this record where I feel like the breakdowns kind of somewhat come out of nowhere right in the dead center of an interesting progression or an interesting tapestry of sounds that they're incorporating, I do like the fact that they try their best to put these breakdowns in sections and add things to these breakdowns that make them interesting, that make them spicy, that give them their own individual flavor, that do add a little bit of memorability to each one. Otherwise, through this fairly short listen, it's a solid release with some flashy mathcore-esque guitar work, some great drum work, some very interesting bass work when it pops up, and some great screams that do remind me somewhat of screamo. Not to mention his growls remind me somewhat of the mid-2000s metalcore scene with bands like August Burns Red and Asking Alexandria, maybe a little bit of mid-era Bullet for My Valentine. At the end of the day, it's a very fire hardcore punk record with a lot of metallic tendencies to it, a lot of heavy metalcore tendencies, and they really find the nice middle ground between hardcore and metalcore. So I highly suggest this record if you enjoy metalcore, hardcore punk, like your things on the more brutal side, with some interesting guitar playing that is a little bit mathcore-esque, and some breakdowns that do break up the monotony a little bit. I'm going to be giving this record an 8 out of 10, And that is a wrap. Please stay for the end screen. I'll link some videos that you might be interested in. Have you heard this new Knocked Loose record, A Different Shade of Blue? If you have, let me know in the comment section below what you thought of it. I would love to discuss the record with you. Like this video if you enjoyed it, it'll help me out a lot, and subscribe to the channel to join the review family today. I'd love to have you here. And smash that notification bell to be notified on my future uploads. My name is Jay Morris, the review guy. You know who it is, and I'm signing off saying farewell.